Hi, I'm Dr. Tatiana Cruz. People in the Alumni Network would know me as Tatiana Fernandez. I was originally class of 2009, and then took a little detour and ended up graduating in 2011. At Williams, I studied history and American studies, and I did concentrations in Africana and Latino studies. And I got my PhD from the University of Michigan in history, and now I'm an assistant professor of history at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
What are three things that come to mind when you think of why you came to Williams?
Financial aid. I for one reason. No, I mean, I think that the reason I came to Williams mostly was because I wanted a really kind of academically rigorous college, and I wanted a small place where I would find community. The second main reason was full financial aid. To be honest, our endowment made a huge difference. I was not always excited about going to Williams because of its location, but my parents were like, you can't turn down that financial aid. And I would say three, I was just really, interested in the whole kind of liberal arts education. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so there was no clear path for me to go to a school where I would have had to designate a major that was very specific. So I like the idea of just going and continuing to study whatever I want to study and then just figure out a career later.
Yeah, sounds great. And then what about, how did you get interested in your academic department now?
Yeah, so I became interested at Williams. I right away started taking African American history, and I was really interested in kind of learning African American and Latinx history because I had no experience of that in high school, and I felt kind of completely deprived of learning about kind of the history of my own people and other marginalized groups. So I started taking those classes really early on, and then I was selected as a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow. And so I did that research fellowship, and I really got a chance to work closely and get some mentors in the history, American studies, Africana studies, and Latinx studies departments. And so for me, I started getting really interested and realizing that this was an actual career path. And so I fell in love particularly with civil rights history and social movement history. And I started doing undergraduate projects on that. And that kind of has blossomed to where I am today, where I'm, a specialist in civil rights history, and I'm still working on all the stuff I started many, many years ago.
Oh, that's awesome. And so going along those lines, what is one thing that really sort of fascinates you about your work?
I'm interested in kind of the history of the people in local grassroots movements. And I never expected to do a project on my hometown, which is Boston. And so now that I've decided to do this work, because I think it's important and a lot of people haven't studied it, I'm really passionate about telling the stories of people who aren't in the archives and haven't been told, particularly, poor and working class women and mothers, and how they've contributed to the civil rights movement.
What's great about these interviews is that it's awesome to hear about sort of your work, and then also more about you and your sort of personality and things you're into. I think it's a really interesting question, which is, if Williams College was an ice cream flavor, which flavor do you think it would be?
Oh, wow. That's like really hard. I think it would be some flavor that I wouldn't like at first. A flavor that, was low key, like looked gross on the outside, but then turns out there's a lot of good stuff on the inside. I don't know, maybe one of those that like the pistachio nut, those kinds of ones that look kind of like grown up, boring ones. But then as a child, when you try it, you're like
a rum raisin.
Yeah, like a rum raisin. I think that's totally, Then something you're like, oh, I could kind of like this. I feel like that describes my relationship with Williams.
That's really funny, yeah. And then what about like if you were an ice cream flavor? Which one would you be?
If I was an ice cream flavor, I think that I have a pretty big personality. So I'd probably be like a sundae with like the kitchen sink thrown in, like all of the things. Because I think I just get easily excited and distracted about a lot of things. So I could imagine I couldn't just be comfortable with just one, because I wouldn't want to be boxed into just one flavor.
Yes, that's a great answer. And then what about, there's a lot of kids at Williams that now want to get into academia, and you've obviously been doing a lot in that field. And do you have any advice for Williams students now that are trying to get into the field based on your own experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best advice I actually got from Professor Scott Wong at Williams in the history department, and he was amazing. But I remember he was like, "Do you really want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this?" And he was like, "Let me just keep it real. There's very few jobs. There's like you're not going to make a lot of money." He was very real with me, and he's like, "If you don't 100% love learning and research, this is not for you." So I think I would say the same thing with given the kind of job market that academia is so competitive, and in the COVID world is even more competitive. I think that I would only recommend students really pursue a PhD in a field that they're truly passionate about and that they understand. They might not get their dream tenure track job, but hopefully they can use that degree for something that's important to them. So you really, really got to be, you got to love it. We're not in it. We're not like econ majors. We're not in it for the money,
Yes,
no dig to you. But I'm just saying,
no,
like,
totally
there's a logic.
Yeah.
There's a logic why people major in certain things, and nobody recommend. I mean, I'm a parent. I wouldn't recommend most people get a history degree these days.
Yeah. Well, something that I think is good about Williams is that I think most people who do major in like whatever they major in, a lot of them like do like it a lot. So you see a lot of people like majoring in very, very random things. I wish I'd majored in something more sort of esoteric and maybe, off the beaten path. Like I've taken like some Russian classes and I'm like, oh, this is so insane. It's great.
But that's the sort of thing that you can do. And like I've seen people with econ degrees do something totally unexpected and not like consulting or Wall Street stuff, So I do think that like what Williams teaches you is that we're all kind of well-rounded. Like the students who go there are pretty well-rounded, and I just feel like we're interested in a lot. So take advantage of that and pick like a different concentration and balance it. We're not like, we're all going to be doctors. We're all going to be lawyers. Like that's just not the Williams way, where we all know what we want coming in. And so that's why I like it, because there's a million things you could do with an econ degree from Williams,
We're going to do this thing called Explain Like I'm Five.
Okay.
So are there any interesting current or sort of recent research that you've done that you can explain just in simple terms that, lay people like us can understand that you find really interesting?
Totally. So I'm working on an article right now on the welfare rights movement in Boston. And I think most people can understand what that is. It's basically looking at how poor and working class Black and Latina mothers advocated for welfare reform in Boston and believe that they should, and protested. And when I tell my actual children, who are the age 5, I say they wanted to be able to provide for their children and provide for themselves. And they lived in an era in the 1960s and 1970s where the economy was failing and there, was job discrimination and racial segregation. So they advocated through welfare.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that does sound really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to sort of COVID related, more personality questions,
Mm-hmm.
Are there any new hobbies or a particular hobby that you've developed since quarantine has started?
Yeah, I mean, I have always been an athlete and I always liked working out, but I never liked running outside. I played rugby at Williams and I played competitive sports my whole life, but like just running by itself outside was never a thing that I truly enjoyed. So I run a lot. And then I guess, I become kind of like a preschool or elementary art teacher with my 2 daughters. So we just do tons and tons of arts and crafts. And it's been kind of taken over our whole lives, and we put them on the windows of our house so we have like outdoor art galleries.
Oh, really? I've noticed since quarantine, especially in April, there have been a lot of people that have put like first responder related art.
Yeah, we try and do like a little uplifting stuff. So we do like different themes, but it's actually been cool because we're kind of new to our neighborhood. So our neighbors have like written our daughter's notes and left art supplies, and it's become kind of like a neighborhood thing that people like, now we're like in Halloween theme, and yeah.
Yeah. And going back to when you were at Williams, is there any class that stands out as sort of the most difficult that you've done, possibly the most rewarding too, but one that's like was really difficult and left an impression on you?
I mean, I think some classes were difficult mostly because I didn't like them. I wasn't really, like there were certain requirements that I didn't love, like statistics wasn't my favorite thing. But I think in terms of challenging in a different way, I did like independent studies, in Latino studies and Africana studies. And those were the most challenging courses because they were either one-on-one or like in a group of like 3 or 4. And, it's just very intense working just with one professor and creating a syllabus that really speaks to you. But because you're so passionate about it, you just put way too much on it and you want to read everything. And so I think those experiences where I got to work kind of one-on-one were my favorite at Williams.
Yeah, interesting. And you said you have kids, right?
Yes.
So what do you think? Do you think you're going to send them over to Williams? Have you been having these conversations yet?
So background for you. I actually had my son at Williams, my first one. I was a student there, so that definitely is how many people remember me, because I was the one person who had a kid at Williams. So that son is now about to be 13, and he grew up at Williams. He spent 3 years at Williams, and he was on the campus and went to the campus daycare with all of the professors' kids. So a lot of our fondest memories of him, at homecoming games, decked out. He doesn't remember any of that. And frankly, he is not interested in Williams College because he feels like there are better schools there. And I'm like, what? How could you not think Williams is a great school? But no, my son is a very competitive basketball player and aspires to play Division I basketball. But if and when he comes back around, our dream, both me and my husband are both Williams alum. So we would love for him to go play at Williams.
Yeah, D3, maybe he won't be on ESPN.
Yeah,
but he'll be
okay.
Playing with some fresh air in the mountains.
Exactly. I mean, I think, the dream for all 3 of my kids is that if Williams was something that excited them, it would excite us. And we'd know that they would get an amazing education. But, we're not going to be those kind of people who push it. It would be kind of cool. I'm first gen. My husband's first gen. So to build kind of a legacy. My little sister went to Williams too. So we're kind of building our own little legacy. So that'd be kind of cool.
Is there a book that you're currently reading that's really interesting?
Almost all the books I read are for my research, but this one I guess is kind of halfway. It's called Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Stringers. It's called The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. And it's, an academic book. She's a sociologist, but it's really cool because I think the like popular, the public would really appreciate it too, a more kind of popular audience, because she really is kind of groundbreaking in this new field called fat studies, and she's really talking about kind of race as it intersects with the idea of being fat and the fear of being fat, and she traces it throughout history. And I think Williams students will like it because there's a lot of art history, that's big at Williams.
Yeah, totally. There has been a rumbling at Williams last year, I think, to do like a fat studies program.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think I remember this like being like not even a rumbling, like it was considered, I think, or something like that. Oh,
cool. I mean, I would imagine that there would at least be a class on that, because it's kind of growing in popularity when you think about like marginalized identities beyond kind of race, ethnicity, gender, class, sexuality. Really, disability studies and fat studies are 2 that are really kind of coming up.
Yeah, totally. Is there any fun fact about you that maybe you haven't shared yet that you think is very exciting?
I mean, normally my fun facts are, that I played rugby. That's a pretty fun fact, because I don't think most people, understand a professor could have ever done anything cool like that. And I think, another fun fact is that I'm Costa Rican. My family's from Costa Rica, which is kind of different. Most people don't know. Many people, we're called ticos. That's what they call us, ticos. And yeah, I mean, I think that my most fun fact is that I'm even a professor, because most of, people walking on the street would never guess that. And most of my students think I'm a student. And I think, that says more about them than it does about me. And that I had a kid in college. So that's my fun fact. I always say I went to a very elite school where nobody had kids, and, I survived.
So another question sort of about you, what kind of music do you listen to? Like, what's your favorite artist?
Yeah, I listen to like almost exclusively hip hop music. I do listen to some kind of Spanish music, but for the most part, I would say my go-to stuff, I still love kind of old school 90s hip hop. And then in the kind of contemporary moment, I feel kind of lame. This is kind of lame, but my son kind of puts me onto the newer music. I joke that it all sounds the same and that they're all like 16-year-old rappers with little something in their name.
Yes, I agree.
But so they all kind of sound the same, and it's very like trap vibes, but it's good for running. And yeah, it's a different world when I have kids that are putting me onto music now.
Is there any advice you have for Williams students who are in the Purple Valley now? Maybe tips for the winter or just tips for studying, anything really?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to give myself advice looking back, and I think it still applies, is just remember that there's a world beyond college. And, while everything seems so important, sometimes being in that space where everyone is so academically driven and so motivated can make you kind of lose sense of the world outside of the purple bubble, and you kind of can forget that this too shall pass, right? This exam will pass, this grade will pass. Like, no one will care about your grades in the end. Like, there's just, and so if I were to give any advice, is to make sure that you are making meaningful connections with your fellow students that will carry beyond Williams, and that you're making meaningful connections with professors that can write you great recommendations, and making the most out of the non-school stuff too, internships, clubs, because in the end, it's for the most part, people take 4 years. Some people take 6 years, like myself, but for the most part, it's just a very short time of your life, and you really should enjoy it, and not be so worried about producing in a particular way or achieving a certain number or a certain GPA, or there's so much more to college than that, and it's really hard when you're in it to realize that.
Well, I want to be mindful of your time, but it's been so great to get to know you, Dr. Cruz.